in recent times, as more people have taken up entrepreneurship, they have become frustrated, and a lot of them have also shut down or moved shop or just explored other countries. You look at the numbers, we're looking at 234 unicorns in China, and you have 30 in India. We keep talking about ease of doing business and how India has gone up the rankings, but how has it really become easier for companies, for startups to set up and start out? The government has, you have a Startup India program, you have a whole host of schemes, there are funds, so on and so forth. There's a lot on paper, but what are the fundamental challenges that startups are really, that are holding back startups and that are holding back people from venturing out on their own? Anjali, would you, since you work with the government?
Also, yes.
Yes.
I think very little actually holds back the youth of today to go into startups. So there is such a tremendous wave of entrepreneurship sweeping the country. And entrepreneurship, by the way, is not new to India. It's not a tech creation. India is a nation of entrepreneurs. Our growth has tended to be bottom up. Your chai wala, dukan wala, dhobi, istri wala, they're all actually micro entrepreneurs in some ways. We have seen 20 years now of very successful microfinance, which has created micro entrepreneurs in women, in poor women, and it is mainstream enough now where microfinance institutions are turning into small finance banks. So in that sense, entrepreneurship is not new. I think Karthik made a point earlier that the speed to market or speed to scale is actually accelerating. And that's the role that capital as well as a regulatory ecosystem plays. Capital is no longer an issue. I think there's a reasonable amount of both global and domestic capital that is now available in India. And certainly in the last few years, I think all of us in the ecosystem have seen the government take some very positive steps. There's a fund for startups that's been set up, administered by SIDBI, the Startup India program, deep engagement with investors as well as entrepreneurs in very forward-looking regulation. But the nature of regulation and government is it will lag and not lead what is happening in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship. So I stay optimistic. Yes, India is getting better in doing business, ease of doing business rankings. Yes, it is still difficult. Our infrastructure is not all there. But at the same time, we now have the largest global digital data network. We have the most robust payment stack, the NPCI stack, which is actually not government owned. It is available. There is deep engagement, whether it's Niti Aayog or it's DPIIT, with actually all of us. All of us have had the opportunity to serve on committees, speak with government, and certainly bring, and even more than us, we are after all capital intermediaries, we are supporters. It's the entrepreneurs themselves who are talking directly to government also.
So the point is the government listening? Yes, I know that there are conversations happening. Is the government listening, and are they responding to the challenges with the speed that you'd like them to respond?
So again, if you look at 2010, when sort of most of us sort of got actively involved in the venture ecosystem, to now, it's like chalk and cheese. It's like night and day. I think there were multiple points have been raised, right? So one is, I think, government-enabled infrastructure was quietly being built over a decade, right? And we owe a lot to that. Of course, then someone like Mukesh Bhai comes and layers a geo on top of that, suddenly erupts. The entire ecosystem suddenly has affordable, connectivity on infrastructure that the government has been enabling. That's part of the good they've done. To your point, I think they need to do a lot more in terms of, I think it's the trust deficit which is in India carries through in every interaction amongst Indians, right? And one is the lack of trust that the government has in its own entrepreneurs and its people, right? So you can't police before the disruption. The disruption, as your topic goes today, the disruption will die if you police disruption, right? And so the approach, like a professor once, I heard a professor say it, on how electric vehicles, for example, or new technologies are adopted in the United States. And in a very simplistic manner, how he explained it was, the greatness of the United States is, if it's not written anywhere, it is permissible.
Sure. Yeah.
In India, it's exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. So if you do something which is not written somewhere or codified in some law, everybody jumps over the other to try and codify it into law the next day. Mm-hmm. and messes it up because there is no such law. And they're trying to design laws around things which didn't exist, right? And that goes into, Rehan as a shareholder in Ola will crib, like the amount of times Ola has been shut down or blockaded somewhere. So I think they've taken huge steps in terms of being collaborative, in involving us in policy. But still, I think that old 50-year, 60-year legacy of not wanting to lose control or not wanting to lose trust basically means that everything is seen with, as if somehow these new entrepreneurs or new business models are going to destroy the country, which is not the opening premise.
I do see a clash. There is one thing that they are trying to do, but then there's certain statements that are made on and off. Like very recently, there was a top minister who's quoted scolding Amazon and the like, saying that you cannot be offering such discounts and hurting the other retailers. Rehan, let me bring you in here. You're also with Ola. So, when over-policing happens and when there is a gap between what you're saying and the real actions, how they are playing out, what does it do to an entrepreneur who's trying to set up? And what does it mean for you as somebody who's supporting these businesses when you look at a business and when you see the regulatory challenges that that particular business may encounter? You obviously take that into account and decide that whether you want to support it or not support it, on what your future strategy is going to be with that business?
See, my view is that I don't think regulatory challenges define an opportunity, right? I think the greatest thing which has happened in this country in the last couple of decades is that we've had this constantly rising GDP, and as a result, we've had more and more people with disposable income. More and more people with disposable income in the country, right? Which alludes to the creation of demand, right? And this has positively impacted almost all sectors, right? And I think, and that has been the bedrock on which all the companies are now being created. Now, along with this, you've had enabling technologies which have come and have provided access. There are payment systems now like Paytm, Bheem, UPI, etc. So I think these are the most important building blocks which have created demand. I mean, you could have the friendliest, you take a country like Singapore, it has the friendliest regulation, but it doesn't have a market, right? Sure. So startup activity in that country for that country is minuscule, right, as a result. Because we have a lot of demand, our startup activity in India is intense. Right? Now, will there be regulatory challenges? Of course, there will be regulatory challenges over here. This is a very large nation. This is a federation of multiple states, and within that, there are multiple municipalities, right? And all of them have their own view, right? And so you're going to crawl along. If you go to Singapore, all the ministers are each other's cousins, and they just speak to each other and say, okay, let's get this regulation fixed. That's a small country, right? In a 1.3 billion nation, you're going to have a very different approach. So I think these challenges will occur. We've seen them in Ola, we've seen them in PharmEasy, which is another company I was a part of. We've seen them in multiple companies that I've been a part of, because technology companies will always push the envelope on regulation, right? But I don't think that is what defines startup activity in the nation. I think this is a democracy. There will be a continuous dialogue between all stakeholders and the government. And I think everyone over here can allude to the fact that the government does listen. They do try to put in things, but it's a big machinery, right? You go and speak to some of the IS officers in Delhi, they have to call up their counterparts in the states. Those guys have to have a buy-in. It takes time, right? But I think the great news is that we have demand, we're continuing that march, and that is wonderful for the startup ecosystem.
Right. Tej, the time duration for a company to become a unicorn is shortened considerably, a point that you alluded to. Why is that? Like a Swiggy became a unicorn in 2 to 3 years, a Flipkart took like almost a decade. What's changed? Why is it that, how are these companies becoming so big so quickly? And is it sustainable?
Yeah, so I think a lot of points were covered, but the Mukesh Bhai's Jio movement was one of the major disruptions because it enabled the internet accessibility to the bottom of pyramid, what Rehan also mentioned, the next billion users may be coming online, right? And second is the availability of cheap phones. Now you could buy, and a lot of it goes to, these Chinese, Vivo, Oppo and Xiaomi, and then obviously we had Micromax and other players from India. So combination of both two and accessibility of data at a, almost, we are the lowest, by the way, in the world in terms of what we charge. Obviously, the telecom companies are getting hurt because of it. But that enabled so much more usage of data. On top of it, a lot of international large investors look at, three big geographies like what Rehan was saying. It's China, US, and India. And India offers, 1.3 billion people. So all the large mega buck sort of private equity investors or sovereign wealth funds are looking at India very carefully, because they are looking at India and saying, this is the next China. And this is where we would like to invest. So also a lot of my Chinese colleagues say this is great time for India to actually take advantage, because China and US are going through a trade war. We have a clear runway. I just worry, are we doing enough to really exploit that? I'll just give one more example in China, coming back to how they manage. Every state has competition. Every state wants to lure startups. They want to bring them to their, and if you look at India, there is only Bangalore, Delhi, and Bombay. So I think more state needs to focus and create the ecosystem so more companies can come out of that, which is still lacking. And the government needs to create competition within the state governments, because that's where you will, increase jobs, bring in more dollars. That's what needs to happen.